Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think it's clear from all that we've talked about and all we know that TRIA has served an important function in this market. It's given us certainty when we wouldn't have had it. It's given us commercial development. It hasn't cost the taxpayers a dime. I hope that we're going to move forward on TRIA soon, but I do have a question about it and a question about whether there should be a change in how it's done. And that is, in other forms of insurance, you pay a fee up front. Under TRIA, the government doesn't get any fee up front for providing this insurance. Instead, if there's a loss, the premise is that the government will recoup on the back end after the terrorism event has occurred. And everyone in this hearing has been talking about the enormous pressure there will be on the government to absorb the losses by the taxpayers generally. So I'm a little concerned that that same pressure is going to be there because of TRIA. Nothing's going to change because of that. So the question I have is, what kind of market impact would it have if we collected a modest fee on the front end for TRIA? And I thought maybe I'd start with you on that, Mr. Elliot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. Let me share just experiences in the marketplace over the last couple of years to give you a sense of my answer. Number one, I would say that we would have to establish prices for that exposure.
Yeah.
And experience has suggested to us that as you raise prices, particularly that middle market customer, they're electing not to purchase. We see take-up rates in the small customer segment much higher than we do in the middle market. And so I'd be concerned that the take-up rates go down in the middle, and in effect, we're going to have a looming issue that will come back to this government in a different form at a different day if we're not careful about how we instituted that.
Well, so let me just make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, Mr. Elliott. What you're saying is, in effect, prices would go up if we actually paid anything at all for that insurance, which tells me right now you're not pricing for the risk that the American taxpayer is absorbing. So you're not setting any money aside for this right now. That is, if an event of terrorism occurs, you're expecting the U.S. government to absorb all these losses and then turn to you, and you haven't set a dollar aside for being able to absorb any of those losses down the line?
We are pricing for our retention, just as you described.
But you're not pricing for the fact that under TRIA, the U.S. government is supposed to come back and collect from you.
That's correct. That's correct.
So in other words, this is just a giveaway program from the United States government that you're not pricing for now?
I think the backstop, the program itself has been a fundamental opportunity to allow us to engage and offer coverage. Again, our net retentions in this business, $34 billion across the industry, and I think that has been a very successful public-private relationship.
But no retention to cover the part that the American taxpayer, as a matter of law, is supposed to come back to you, and you are supposed to pay for, not the American taxpayer.
Right. That would be a forward recoupment in the sense of this program at the moment.
And Senator, I would, echo Mr. Elliott's comments in that the post-funding, if you will, in the event is, I think, a much more efficient way for us to fund this. If we were to collect something today, we'd be making an estimate of what that is. I mean, we're talking about something that's way out on the tail back to, and the fact is there is a very defined mechanism, whether it has to be tweaked or not, which was asked earlier, in terms of what the recoupment is. There's a very defined mechanism would play. Certainly, is there a liquidity issue in terms of how the money would move? I'd say yes to that, but there is a mechanism in place to make sure that the taxpayer is paid back.
Well, but let me just make sure I'm understanding that. I understand that it would be difficult to price this, but is there anyone who believes that the price is zero? I'm hearing you say no. No one believes that the price is zero, and yet that's exactly what you're paying for it right now. You're paying zero.
But I guess, Senator, I guess I'd say again, I believe it's a much more efficient way, and that if God forbid there's an event that happens and there becomes a dollar amount that has to be recouped, there's a defined mechanism in place to go about collecting that over some period of time, up to $27.5 billion.
Well, I appreciate, and I'm afraid I'm going to be out of time here, but I really do have to say on this, this whole thing is premised on the fact that the United States government will be called on to backstop if there's an event of terrorism. That's the reason we put TRIA in place. But we put TRIA in place to say we're going to get some sharing on those costs. And yet it seems to me the same pressure is going to be in place on the United States government to absorb these losses if there's no mechanism in place to have at least offset some of those costs ahead of time, or if you're not setting any money aside to absorb those losses on down the line. So I don't see how the pressure changes this, and it just raises for me some serious questions about TRIA.